All right, so the frame's done, and I'm gonna take you through the process now on how to go through and straighten the wall. Got a few walls around me, so what we'll do is we'll do a couple walls, and I'll show you how to straighten it when the studs are bowing out, and then also when the studs are bowing in. There's two different techniques we have to do, depending on which way the studs are. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do before we even pick up a straight edge and start checking these studs is going through and shooting off the junctions. The junctions are just any corner where two walls meet each other like this. As we can see now, they're not shot off, and there's a lot of movement between the two. We've got to fix these off together, make sure these are straight, make sure they're a fixed point, and then we can straighten the wall from there. So for these end junction studs, they should be straight. When you build a wall, you always want to make sure these end studs are straight. And we do just want to confirm that. You can see I put my straight edge on that, and that is perfectly straight. After confirming that it's straight, I'm just going to go through and shoot that on. And now we can see that that corner is a fixed point, that's not going to move. So before we even start straightening walls, I'll run around the entire unit and do every single junction. I'll check everything, shoot all the end studs off. And the reason that we don't do this in framing stage is we like to wait until there's a roof on above us. Because if the studs are getting hit by rain, being weathered, there is a chance that they can warp and start to bow. So even though we do put straight studs in, we still want to double check to make sure that they are still straight. Okay, so in terms of straightening the wall, now I'm going to grab the straight edge and check to see which way these studs are bowed. It looks like we're actually pretty lucky to start with. So far these are dead straight. We've got the smallest little bow in this stud here, but actually in terms of this wall, it's not too common that you get that lucky and that this wall's actually completely straight. We do have heaps of walls around us, so we definitely will either do a few studs that we need to straighten. And we'll get to that in a second, but what I will do with this wall now is I've gone through and I'm always going to check every single stud first. And then after that, we're going to turn the straight edge sideways and just make sure that this wall is straight when we go sideways like this. And we'll start going in a few different angles as well and make sure there's no rocks or bows anywhere. All right, this is normally what you dream of, a perfect wall. I actually don't need to touch that at all. It always goes this way. This is the one time I was hoping the wall wasn't straight so I could show you how to straighten it. I do not need to touch that at all. We'll jump onto another wall and hopefully this one isn't good so I can show you what to do. All right, good news, we've got a wall and this one does have a bit of a rock in it. It's not massive, but you can see the straight edge is rocking there. Now, when it comes to straightening a stud, we're either going to do one of two things. In this case, if the stud is sticking out, we're going to get the planer and plane it back until it's straight. If it was the other way around and the stud was hollow, then we'll get a bit of masonite. And what we'll do in this case is plane the masonite for the masonite to blend into the stud and pack it out to make with a straight line. Out of those two options, the easiest option is always just to get the planer and go through and hit the stud with the planer. And because of that, we make sure for every single external wall, when we slide our studs when we're building the walls, we always want to make sure the bows are facing inward. That means for every single external wall here, I don't even need to worry about masonite. I can just get my planer and hit it with my planer, which is firstly quicker. I can go through and just hit that a few times instead of having to plane the masonite to suit and then nail in the masonite on. So it's quicker just hitting it with a planer and also cheaper. These days, 1 length of masonite like this costs $1. So when you're doing a full house, you're going to go through a fair few of these with your internal walls, and it does get expensive in materials and then also in labour because it takes longer. The first thing I'm going to do here is I can actually feel these junction blocks are slightly sticking out. So I'm just going to go through and plane those back. So this stud isn't too bad, but what I will do is play around with the straight edge, and once you start rocking it and moving it up and down, you can find that central point where it's rocking off. And this stud, it is bowing quite evenly in the center here. So I'm going to do a couple pass-bys. I'm setting this down so we're not taking too much out. What I'm going to do is firstly go over a greater distance the first time through. And then to even it out and fade it out, I'm just going to go a little bit less. And if need be, we'll just keep doing it that way. You don't want to keep starting your planer in the same spot because then suddenly the stud will just step in where you keep hitting it with the planer. It's important when you're hitting a stud, especially if it's really bad, to start with a big long plane going the entire distance and then just going shorter and shorter so that it does gradually just become straight. So what I'll do is hit that a couple times. We'll throw the straight edge back on it. I would say that's good. For the sake of the video though, you can hear it's got a very slight rock. And I can see it's just hitting right in the middle of the stud. So we'll just go through. We hit that one last time, and if we check this now, if we check that, that is dead straight. We've actually been surprisingly really lucky with this wall as well. That was the only stud there that had a bow. These ones are all pretty good. And once I've gone through and planed back any single stud I need to, we'll do that same thing we talked about earlier. I'll put the straight edge on the angle, and we can actually see now, this is what we're looking for. This has a very small kick in it. this is why we also check the wall a different way as well. It looks like what's happening is that this will straight through here, and then it may slightly kick off and not continue in a straight line when it turns into the internal wall. Because of that, this is where the wall's joint, and that's where that's sticking out a little bit. So what we'll do then is plane back the stud slightly. We're gonna try to find that middle ground of taking out a bit in the stud so that it may not be completely straight along the stud, but that it will be straighter when we check the wall as a whole. So I'm not taking out much at all, but we'll do the same thing, gradually take less and less out. So I'll go for a smaller pass by now. And just take a tiny bit more out in the middle. All right, now if we check it, that's already looking a lot better. And I want to make sure I move this up and down as well to check it at different points. You can hear that we've got a small rock on this nog here, so I'm just going to go through and plane back a bit more of this nog. And we've got this pretty good. This is within 1 millimeter right now. I don't know what the official tolerances are, but for most people I know, when they're straightening walls, the tolerance is around 3 mil over a 2.7 straight edge. So that means you can have a bow up to 3 mil. When we're talking about bathrooms where it's going to be tiled, that tolerance goes down to 1 mil. Now personally, if I'm on a job where I can do it and I've got the time to do it, I always like working to that mil. So this wall here, we probably didn't even need a touch. It is getting plastered. To start with, it was within that 3 mil tolerance, and we just played around with it and got it down to that 1 mil tolerance there. So that section of wall there is great. Obviously the outside of the wall is all brick, so we don't have to worry about straightening that. So we can't do the other side of this wall here, but what I'll do is run around now and we'll find a hollow stud, and I'll show you the other way on how to straighten a stud by putting a masonite packer on it to pack it out to become straight. All right, the lighting isn't great in here, but we had that much luck in that back section. There were barely any studs that had bows in them, so I had to jump over here. It's a dark day, we're in a dark corner of the house. I'll do my best so you can see what we're doing. But as you can see there, we finally found a stud that has a generous bow in it. So my ruler doesn't even slide in there, so I think the bow we have is about 4 mil. So it's not massive, but we do need to fix it. It's gonna make it even harder for me as well. I wasn't planning to straighten these 3-meter studs today, so I didn't bring a big enough straight edge. The first thing I'm gonna do is get a piece of masonite like this, and I wanna just fade the ends out. I'm gonna come back in this case roughly around 600 mil and go 600 mil to nothing. And then I'm gonna do that again, going roughly 300 mil to nothing. I really don't think you're gonna see that, but what we've done is just gradually faded out the packer. I'll then spin it around and we'll do the same thing on the other side. And then from there, I'm just gonna hold this packer up against the stud. I'm not gonna nail it on yet, and I'm just gonna put the straight edge up against it, and we're just gonna look at how it's looking now. So this is actually looking really good. What I'm looking for now is I wanna make sure there's no rock on the straight edge. I wanna make sure I haven't packed it out too much. And since there isn't a rock on the straight edge, I'm just gonna get a soft sheet nail, and I'm just gonna tack this on with one nail. Now from here, what I can do is put the straight edge back up, and because I'm using a smaller straight edge, I'm just running it back and forth and making sure it's straight the entire way. And in this case, we actually look really good. So I'm happy with that, and I can go through and nail that off. If your stud was really bowed, what I'd do is just tack on that first bit of masonite, we'll put the straight edge back up. And what you might have to do is snap off another bit of masonite to make it smaller, do the same thing and fade it out, and pack out the middle even more. What you don't want to do though is put another full-size bit of masonite on, going from the same point. Ideally what you want to do is have the masonite go in from where you started planing this first bit of masonite, and then just continuously fade it out. So it should be a nice, smooth, straight line when you're done. Because this one is good though, I do want to go through with my soft sheets. And we are putting heaps of these soft sheets in the masonite. It's really important that you do close spaces. So if I did a nail there and then gave it about 400 mil and did a nail at the bottom here, this bit of masonite in the middle here is loose. And what could happen is a plasterers could just glue up that bit of masonite, put your plaster on it, and unless they put a screw right where it's bowing, that could influence how far the plaster's sticking in and out. So you want to make sure you nail it off, so once your plaster goes on, your masonite isn't cupping at all and it is definitely straight with the stud. And obviously once this is nailed off, we're going to do that same thing, get our straight edge, check the wall sideways, which this one is great right now, and do the same thing and check it on all different angles and slide the straightedge edge around everywhere to make sure it's going to be straight when they go through to put the plaster up. But there you have it, that's how you go through and straighten walls.